Hi everyone, it's Olga from Eagle. Halloween is coming, and even though you might not be going trick-or-treating, then Russians aren't really trick-or-treating. I still can give you a portion of spooky stories, all of which originate in St. Petersburg. Let me start with the time of Peter the Great, because he was quite a spooky czar. How about the fact that he killed his own son? Yes, he had a son from his first marriage whose name was Prince Alexis. And one day, Peter the Great heard that his son, Prince Alexis, started a political plot against his own father. The thing is, Prince Alexis did not support all the liberal ideas of Peter the Great. On top of that, Prince Alexis wasn't really happy with the arranged marriage that his father, Peter the Great, arranged for him. As a result of this, he caught up with a group of local aristocrats that were also hoping to overthrow Peter the Great. But his father, Peter, found out about the political plot, arrested all of the participants, had them tortured and executed, and he didn't even make an exception for his own son. Prince Alexis is now buried in Peter and Paul's fortress, same place as the rest of the royal family, but not inside of the fortress. Instead, is right by the entrance to the local cathedral. Myth number 2 is about Peter the Great too. The thing is, he was pretty cruel, not only when it came to treason, but also when it came to adultery. And one of the women in his life happened to cheat on him. What did Peter the Great do? He had the lover executed, his head cut off, and then put in a glass jar, which he then forced his lover to have on her nightstand. Yes, she was forced to look at the head of her lover for days. Yes. Peter the Great was also sometimes unwillingly involved in some spooky stories. Take, for example, the very first museum in Russia that he decided to start. The name of the museum is Kunstkamera. And originally, it started as a place where Peter the Great had his collection of interesting items that he would bring from his journeys. For example, his trip to Italy or his trip to Holland. But during one of his trips to Holland, he purchased a medical collection from a Dutch doctor, Dr. Cruyss. And the collection involved fetuses put in jars in formaldehyde. The fetuses with different biological abnormalities. For example, an enormous head. He also had Siamese twins in his collection, and all these other different oddities. And Peter the Great purchased the whole collection and he put it in Kunstkamera, that very first museum. He really wanted to encourage people to come to the museum and get educated and see what type of things are possible in nature, but people believed that Peter was an antichrist. Even Peter the Great's huge bribery campaign didn't work. For example, he said that everybody who comes to Kunstkamera would get a cup of coffee if it's a female, or a shot of vodka if it's a male visitor. But then what ended up happening is that people would come into the museum, they would get their free shot of coffee or vodka or whatever, and ran straight out of the museum to the local church where they would pray, asking God to forgive them their sins of going into this terrible. Well, all these stories took place in the 18th century, but 100 years after, in the 19th century, people in St. Petersburg started believing that the whole environment of the city can possibly drive you insane or lead to depression. For example, have you heard of the novel Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky? The plot of the novel revolves around a man who kills an old moneylender lady. And this is just how the novel starts. Both the writer and the scholars that study the novel right now believe that the whole environment of St. Petersburg led him to this murder. And Dostoevsky was not the only writer that wrote about it. In fact, other people of culture in St. Petersburg were believed to suffer from depression. Take, for example, a prominent Russian composer, Peter Tchaikovsky. Some people believe that he died because of depression. However, there is another version to the story. Some other people believe that he died during the epidemic of cholera. He went into a restaurant where all he asked for was a glass of water. But that glass of water was contaminated with cholera, and that led to the composer's death. St. Petersburg was a scary place to live, wasn't it? Well, this is not the spookiest story that took place in St. Petersburg. Have you heard of Rasputin's murder? Oh, so many things were done to him, from gunshots to knife wounds to even being thrown in the water and in the fire. Do you want to hear more about it? Check out my next video about Rasputin.